Aquí tenemos una muy amiga y elemento de nosotros que nos ha tocado perder por el camino, pero igual no nos pesa y sabemos que en esto andamos y si morimos en esto, pues sabemos que lo hacemos por algo que vale la pena.
Many sicarios will say they don't mind dying, but when one of their men falls, they rain hell on the enemy who did it. And sometimes, they kill dozens of law enforcement officers in a single encounter.
Ocho, en Aguililla, ocho heridos, X13, ocho.
Other times, they terrorize innocent tourists simply passing by.
No, please, what?
You'd think most cartel encounters happen between rival hitmen, but the infamous cartel wars affect everyone, authorities, tourists, and millions of local families, having to flee for their lives every single day. Let's explore some of the most vicious Mexican cartel encounters recorded in the last few years, and place these in the current context. These two friends were traveling through Mexico in their car in 2020, heading from one town to another and enjoying the gorgeous nature surrounding them. But within a few seconds, a peaceful drive turned into a traumatic moment.
No, please, what?
Through the driver's window, you can see a group of cartel sicarios stopping them at gunpoint. The men thought they were moments away from getting murdered when the sicarios started talking to them. In that area, the cartel operated as a sort of law enforcement. The sicario who talked to the driver asked him who they were, where they were going, and why. In fact, the gang was guarding that area for their cartel, and they wanted to make sure the two friends were not officers or spies for a rival cartel.
What's your name?
Aaron.
See
you. Logan. What's your name?
Philip.
The men were eventually set free, but you can see they were barely recovering from a fright they will remember their whole lives. These two friends will have had a shocking story to tell their friends after their return to the United States. But it's not a funny story. It was a terrifying experience, and they know all too well it could have gone wrong in a million ways. Plus, others are not as lucky. These two men were driving a truck carrying a precious load down a national road when a cartel SUV stopped in front of them and forced them to stop the car as well. A group of armed sicarios then got out of the SUV and made angry signs at the truck driver to get out. The men knew the drill. You don't fight the cartel. You just put your hands up and do as you're told. But as the driver's assistant rushes out of the truck, you can see bullets flying at them anyway. The cartel was ready to take their lives even if they complied. As they both step out of the truck, two sicarios get in, confirming this was an organized robbery. Sadly, this happens more often than dash cams or surveillance cameras can record. Robberies and kidnappings are some of the cartel's main sources of income, and they already know how to plan them and who to target for optimal results. When you have zero regard for human lives, it's easy to plan successful crimes. Cartels only seem to get better at it, but hey, those on the good side of the law also get better at catching sicarios. One of the cartel's main smuggling routes is, of course, by water. So there are loads of patrol boats in Mexico and the US, looking out for potential danger and narcotics going from Mexico to the States. Recently, these US Coast Guards were conducting a routine daytime patrol when they noticed a submarine.
That's gonna be hard to get on.
It sounds like something out of a bad action movie, but the guards actually made it onto the submarine in an attempt to stop it in its tracks and arrest those inside. The entrance was sealed, but as the officer pounded on the door repeatedly, a cartel member opened the door. The patrol officer managed to arrest him, and just like he suspected, discovered oodles of narcotics inside the submarine. This was a small victory in a war that doesn't seem to end, but small victories appear to be the only possible way to win the war on drugs. Here, we move from the sea to the desert, as these patrol agents are sent to stop an airplane from leaving the country with a huge quantity of white powder. But as the officers knew about the cartel operations, the cartel knew about the officers coming to stop them. Remember, cartels have loads of people infiltrated in law enforcement and just as many corrupt officers on their payroll. That way, their smuggling routes are protected, and they're notified of operations like this one, meant to stop them in their tracks. So when the patrol agents approached the plane, they were met with a storm of bullets. They fired back, and a short but brutal battle ensued. Then, the most incredible thing happens. As the sicarios get inside the airplane and attempt to take off, the agents speed and speed until they crash into the plane and stop their escape. If they were a few seconds late, the plane would have been too high above the ground for their SUV to hit its wing. But the officers were prepared to injure themselves in order to stop this cartel plane, and they drove as fast as they could. As the plane's wing was completely shattered, it was clear the plane could not take off anymore. The only thing for the sicarios to do was try and escape the airplane by foot, but the authorities were prepared for that too. Before the plane's single pilot could exit, the agents surrounded and arrested him. Authorities are well prepared to fight cartels. They have military weapons, huge task forces, and of course, they expect nasty things to go down, so they're always on guard. But what about civilians? Many people who live in Mexico know the dangers cartels pose to their everyday lives. However, they can't live in fear 24/7, and sometimes they just need to carry on with their lives and hope for the best. One man was on his way to work when he was brutally kidnapped by a group of sicarios. This footage shows the terrifying moment the man was taken and his desperate attempt to escape the sicarios' grip. As the red sedan drives backward, the struggling man finally manages to escape the other men's grip and throws himself on the ground. The man quickly got up, fearing the sicarios would be back for him, and choosing the smartest plan available, he asked a few scared bystanders to enter their house and hide from the criminals. But, as you might suspect, not all people get this lucky.
This is for the record. Nita and 4 of my grandchildren are burnt. Shot up.
There's 5 kids sitting on the side of the road, got shot in the mouth, shot in the foot, shot in the leg.
This Mormon family was not on holiday in Mexico. They'd been living there for almost 2 decades. But in November 2019, they got in 3 large SUVs and started driving to a wedding a few dozen miles away from their home. They had barely been driving for a few minutes when their convoy was stopped by an even larger convoy, led by cartel hitmen. Within a few minutes, it was a total massacre.
The FBI is now investigating the murders of 9 American women and children in Mexico. The victims, all members of a Mormon community. They were ambushed last week near the U.S. border.
One of the LeBaron family's children, Devin, survived the bullet storm that the sicarios rained on them in an attempt to rob them. He ran for his life, fearing the sicarios would see him and take his life too. But reaching his home and notifying his dad of the situation was more important than his life in those moments.
Walking all those miles was if there was anybody else out there trying to shoot me or following me. I was trying to hide myself the best I could under a bush. Going through my mind was to get help because every one of them were bleeding really bad, so I was trying to get in a rush to get there.
Eventually, Devin reached his dad, and the part of the family that had stayed at home that day rushed to the scene, only to find a sight that would scar them for life.
This is for the record. Nita and 4 of my grandchildren are burnt. Shot up.
The bodies are burnt inside the vehicle.
Indeed, the sicarios first hit them with bullets. Then, they set fire to one of their cars, stealing another.
They just started hitting the car at first, like with a bunch of bullets, and they just got us on the floor, and then they drove off.
Donna, Devin's mother, and 2 of her children died in the fire. In total, 3 women and 6 children lost their lives that day.
The whole thing was a bloody massacre, is what it was, on innocent lives. The most innocent.
The surviving children were flown to a big hospital via helicopter, then flown again to Arizona for more intensive treatment and rehabilitation. 2 babies died, but one of them, 7-month-old Faith, miraculously pulled through.
Christina's baby is alive. Praise God. We got Faith. She is alive. Do you understand me? God is so good. You don't even know.
Baby Faith is her name. She actually miraculously survived. And after hours and hours of being alone by herself in the car, they were able to find her.
That's an optimistic view of things. Rejoice for those who survived. But it's simply devastating that such a brutal thing can happen to anyone passing through or living in Mexico. This man was just about to enter his home in Tamaulipas when a gang of sicarios surrounded him and pointed military-style weapons at his head. The message was clear. They were going to steal his car, and there was nothing he could do about it. Scared for his life, he handed the sicarios his car keys. The man's wife heard the kerfuffle and exited the house, only to watch as their car was being driven away by these violent sicarios. These things can happen, When they do, you have to be stoic and let them happen. Otherwise, there's a risk the sicarios might take your life too. This newspaper office in Cordoba, Veracruz caught a brutal attack on its surveillance cameras.
In November 2011, this gang were filmed breaking into the offices of El Buen Tono in Cordoba. Staff were seen fleeing the building shortly after.
A dozen armed sicarios stormed into the office during its late working hours and poured gasoline all over its floors, desks, and documents. Finally, they set the office on fire. Nothing was left. The employees were quick to flee the scene, and, thankfully, no one died in the fire. But the horror was far from over. You see, being a journalist in Mexico and other Central and South American countries is one of the most dangerous careers.
And that we've seen perhaps 150 Mexican journalists who have been murdered since 2000. I knew personally, 2 of them.
By burning down this office, the cartel sent a message to the newspaper. They shouldn't investigate them anymore. This is what happens to those that dig where they shouldn't. Mexico hardly feels like a free country because of this. It's the same in Colombia. This is what happened to journalist Gineth Lima in 2000.
But in 2000, she got too close to uncovering an arms smuggling ring involving government prison officials and imprisoned paramilitary leaders. She was kidnapped, driven 2 hours out of Bogota, bound and thrown into a garbage dump.
That's not even all. She was beaten so badly that she could not move her body. When they threw her next to a garbage dump, Gineth was only half conscious and unable to leave. She was convinced she would die in a few hours. Through nothing short of a miracle, a taxi driver drove past Gineth and saw her. He immediately brought her into his car and drove her to the nearest hospital. Gineth, although close to death, could perfectly remember her abuser's words.
Pay attention, she was told by her abusers. We are sending a message to the press in Colombia.
Indeed, the hell Gineth went through that day wasn't even solely directed at her. It was a message for the entire press in Colombia. They shouldn't be on the side of justice. Gineth had just uncovered evidence of super high-level corruption, arms smuggling, where cartel members, paramilitary groups, and officials were involved. This is the sad reality. High-ranking politicians and law enforcement officers often work hand in hand with cartels to make the big bucks. The money they make from criminal endeavors does not get taxed. Also, the chunks of cash can be so big they surpass anything they could earn legally, hence the temptation. So instead of working actively towards stopping the cartels, many officials and authorities work to protect them so they can keep earning money. The smuggling routes are protected, arrests are postponed, sicarios are released from jail with light warnings, and journalists are threatened into silence. Imagine having a job that can always get you a death warrant.
Including one time where I was accused of being a DA agent, and this guy said if he saw me again, he'd put a bullet in my head.
Or that brings you to scenes like this.
I found myself by 2012 in a morgue in Monterrey with 49 bodies who'd all been decapitated, all had their hands and feet cut off. The stench of death, and like, what the hell am I covering? What am I following here?
As a patrol car passes through an area controlled by a local cartel, officers notice a slew of abandoned vehicles and what looks like a crash scene. Something terrible had happened, but it was not over, as the officers were about to find out. The sicarios surprised the patrol car from both sides and fired bullets at them until one hit their windshield. The officer sped until he reached the tunnel, where the officers could protect themselves and their car, at least temporarily. The officers chose to escape the situation that day. Judging by the large number of cars robbed and abandoned on the road, they realized they were heavily outnumbered. Plus, the sicarios fired at them from higher ground, left and right of the road. They would not have made it out alive if they tried to fight back. In situations like these, it's best to call for backup and let your department know of the situation, returning better prepared. This sicario entered a Chihuahua store with a plan to rob it. But as sicarios sometimes know about authorities' plans ahead, this time, authorities knew of the sicarios' plan. It was supposed to be a well-orchestrated bust by a local cartel, but the officers were a few minutes ahead of them. Watch as several patrol cars surround the store. The cars quickly set up a siege formation around the store, with a plan to arrest the sicario without violence. The officers then stormed into the store, surprising the sicario and leaving little room for him to escape. It was a good plan carried out perfectly, and the sicario was arrested before he could fire at the officers. No one was harmed that day, and the store was not robbed. This camera captured the intense moment when 3 cartel members on a boat tried to escape a law enforcement helicopter. This was happening while some people were relaxing on the beach. Funnily enough, they did not move. They watched as if these things happened every day. Do they? The cartel boat glided at top speed into the sandy beach, while the helicopter followed. There was nothing the sicarios could do on the boat now, so they tried to escape on foot. But running on sand with a military-armed helicopter above you is not exactly the route to success. The helicopter landed on the beach. The officers got out and chased the sicarios on foot, arresting them and charging them with narcotic smuggling.
Here's a sobering stat. Despite the fact that El Chapo has been in prison now for more than 2 years, the violence in Mexico has actually increased, breaking a record 31,174 murders in 2017.
This is the rough reality of Mexico today. Cartels rise and fall, but the violence stays the same. And as of 2024, the number of annual victims is still at an all-time high. The last decade has been particularly brutal, as cartels have been arming themselves with paramilitary equipment, bombs, and drones.
The Jalisco New Generation Cartel took the fight to the next level, shooting down a military helicopter with a rocket-propelled grenade.
They've been dropping bombs from the drones, and we have the military right here, but it doesn't seem like they're interested in stopping the other guys from dropping all those bombs.
They're dropping drone bombs just over there?
That just happened today. They dropped like 5 bombs today.
You're kidding. Where?
Across the river.
Surveillance cameras catch small-time criminals, robbing stores and tourists. But cartels operate at a much higher level, creating chaos as leverage to gain more money, power, and control over the government.
And all that violence is only to have leverage in the negotiations with the government, with politicians, right? They create this chaos to go and sit with the local politicians and say like, okay, do you want more or shall we negotiate this stuff?
And oftentimes, this chaos destroys the lives of innocent people, forcing them to flee from their homes with nothing more than a backpack. Others lose their lives or their children in brutal cartel wars. Civilians are nothing but collateral damage to cartels.
Y les digo a mis hijos, levántense, le digo, porque quién sabe qué está pasando en la calle. Digo, vístanse y nos salimos. Y todo empezó a tronar, ya no había luz, todo empezó a tronar, tanques, camionetas. Pero sí, ahí perdí a mis niños y a mi hija.
Other civilians, locals or tourists, are targeted for their money or valuables.
Helpless families are being innocently killed down there. It's not just got caught in gunfire in the wrong place at the wrong time. This is a whole new level of cartel violence.
And other times, they just fall victim to horrific cases of mistaken identity.
We turned down this little side road because we was gonna see if that led us to the destination and we was gonna turn around. We heard a car beat the horn and pulled around us. Zendel was in the back seat. He said, "Don't stop."
In 2023, Latavia and Eric miraculously survived a harrowing kidnapping. But when their car was stopped, their friends, Zindel and Shaid, tried to run, and they were killed on sight.
They jumped out to run, and they were gunned down.
The 4 were traveling from South Carolina to Matamoros, Mexico, where one of them was bound to have surgery. Shortly after crossing the border, their car was stopped, and all hell broke loose. Latavia and Eric were forced into the back of a cartel's truck at gunpoint. Their 2 friends were bleeding to death on the ground. They were still alive, struggling not to pass out, but Latavia and Eric couldn't do anything to save them.
He was hit 2 times and big chunks of meat was gone out of him.
The 2 dying men were put in the back of the truck too, but no one tended to them after they arrived. The 4 friends were taken to a safe house filled with guns. Several men wearing masks interrogated them for hours. Latanya and Eric didn't know what they wanted from them. Finally, the sicarios stopped interrogating them. Surprisingly, they came to the realization that the 2 were of no help and decided not to off them for the moment. To their surprise, they then offered them treatment, but that meant stitching Eric's foot without anesthesia.
They just stitched it up? Or did they give you
no pain medicine or nothing?
Later that day, all the stitches burst out. The bullet was still inside his leg. At this point, the 2 were wondering if this was treatment or torture. After all, their two friends, one of whom was their brother, were shot and left to die. Why did the sicarios choose to keep them alive? In the evening, LaTanya saw one of the sicarios watching something on his phone. When she asked him what he was watching, he showed her the video of them getting kidnapped earlier that day.
I just started crying. It's like I'm never going home.
After 4 days of unspeakable torture, the siblings were rescued. To this day, they do not understand why they were targeted. The sicarios did not try to get a ransom for them, and they kept 2 alive while unaliving 2 others. It made no sense. One official theory states that they were mistaken for Haitian narcotic smugglers. This would explain the hours-long interrogation that they stopped once they realized they had the wrong people. Such confusion is not unique. Fear, confusion, and a constant state of paranoia are common companions when you're living in cartel-controlled areas of Mexico, and even safe areas can become war zones overnight. It's impossible to know all the cartel wars going on at a given moment. A cartel can suddenly invade a region, then cause an all-out war with another cartel that has smuggle routes in the area. This was just a glimpse into the chaos and destruction brought by Mexican cartels on a daily basis. Do you know of other shocking cartel encounters? Let me know in the comments section. And before you go, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit that bell button. See you next time, and stay safe.